The snow wasn't gentle. It was a sharp, biting thing, thrown from a bruised purple sky, and it found every gap in Imani's worn wool coat. Each flake that landed on her cheek felt like a tiny needle of ice. The walk from the bus stop was always the worst part of the day, a final penance after 10 hours of scrubbing marble floors and polishing chrome fixtures that cost more than her entire life. Her uniform, a practical dark blue dress and white apron, was hidden beneath her coat, but she could still feel the starched stiffness of it, a reminder of the invisible person she was from 9 to 7. She worked at the Pinnacle, a spire of glass and steel that clawed at the clouds, a place where the air itself seemed filtered and expensive. She knew the residents not by name, but by their habits. The woman in 34B, who only drank Pellegrino. The man in 28A, with the parade of identical-looking blondes. And him, the resident of the penthouse.
Kwon Yihon.
She only ever saw him in the private elevator or the lobby, a silent storm in a perfectly tailored suit. He moved like the world owed him space, and the world always paid. His suits were always dark, the fabric whispering of impossible expense. His face was carved from unforgiving stone, all sharp angles and severe lines, his eyes holding a chilling stillness. He never spoke to the staff. He never had to. His presence was a command. Imani had once seen him dismiss a rival who had dared to approach him in the lobby with a single, level look. The other man had physically recoiled, shrinking under the weight of that silent dismissal. He was power made flesh. Tonight, that power was gone. She saw him as she rounded the corner onto the grand, heated driveway of the Pinnacle. He wasn't inside. He was sitting on the lowest marble step of the entrance, the one usually kept pristine by the grounds crew. The automatic door slid open and shut for other residents, spilling warm, golden light onto the snow, but none of it seemed to touch him. He was a statue of ruin. His suit, a charcoal gray that she knew was Tom Ford, was rumpled, dusted with a fine layer of snow on the shoulders. His black hair, usually styled with surgical precision, was disheveled. But it was his posture that stopped her heart. He wasn't sitting, he was folded in on himself, his elbows on his knees had bowed. The absolute, unshakable certainty he usually carried was shattered. He looked lost, broken. A sleek black car purred to a stop at the curb. A man she recognized as one of Mr. Kwan's lieutenants, a man named Park, got out. He didn't approach his boss. He walked to the back of the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out 2 simple cardboard boxes. He set them on the wet pavement a few feet away from Kwon Ji-hoon. "This is all they'd let me take," Park said, his voice flat, devoid of respect. "The accounts are frozen. The penthouse is sealed. You are out, Kwon. The family has spoken." Kwon didn't move. He didn't even look up. Park sneered, a flash of ugly triumph on his face. "You should have seen it coming. Your brother was always smarter than you." He got back in the car, and it slid away into the snowy darkness, leaving the deposed king on his crumbling throne of marble. Imani stood frozen, hidden in the shadows of a large ornamental planter. This was not her business. She knew what kind of man Kwon Ji-hoon was. She'd heard the whispers, seen the men with hard eyes who came and went from his penthouse. He was a gangster, a mafia boss, the head of the city's most powerful Korean syndicate. His world was one of violence and blood, a world she wanted no part of. The smart thing to do was to turn around, take the long way home, and forget she ever saw this. But she couldn't. She watched as he finally lifted his head, staring at the boxes. He slowly reached out, not for the boxes, but for the snow-covered ground beside him. His long fingers she'd once seen adorned with a heavy, menacing ring, brushed against the slush. He was a man with nothing left but the suit on his back and 2 boxes of possessions. Something inside her, a stubborn knot of compassion she'd inherited from her grandmother, refused to let her walk away. She told herself it was foolish, dangerous, insane.
She did it anyway.
She stepped out from behind the planter, her worn boots crunching on the pristine snow. He heard the sound, and his head snapped up. For the first time, his eyes met hers directly. They were dark, bottomless, and for a split second, they held a raw, feral panic. Then the mask slammed back into place. The cold, impenetrable stillness returned, But she had seen it. She had seen the man beneath the monster. She walked toward him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stopped a few feet away, clutching the strap of her tote bag. Mr. Kwan. His gaze was heavy, analytical. He was assessing her. A threat? A witness? An inconvenience? She was just the maid, the invisible woman who cleaned his lobby. He probably didn't even know her face. "They evicted you," she said, the words feeling stupid and obvious in the cold air. He said nothing. A muscle feathered in his jaw. That was his only response. "You have nowhere to go." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, hanging cold and sharp between them. The snow fell harder, clinging to her eyelashes. He finally spoke, his voice a low, rough thing, scraped raw with something she couldn't name. "What do you want?" She should have wanted to be as far away from him as possible. She should have been terrified. A part of her was. But another, louder part saw a human being left to freeze in a storm, betrayed and abandoned. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "You don't have to have much to share, a little warmth, Imani." She took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "I have a room," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. It's not like what you're used to. It's small, but it's warm. And it's safe." She looked at him, this powerful, dangerous man, now utterly defeated. "You can stay with me." The silence that followed was absolute. The world seemed to hold its breath. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face for the angle, the trick, the price. In his world, nothing was free. Kindness was a currency used to buy something later. But he found nothing in her expression but a steady, unblinking sincerity. He looked from her face to the indifferent glass doors of the building that had been his fortress. He looked at the two pathetic boxes that now contained his entire life. Then his eyes came back to her. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was the moment everything changed. She had just invited the storm into her house. She helped him carry his boxes to the bus stop, the silence between them a heavy, living thing. He moved with a stiff, wounded pride, refusing to let her take the heavier box. The other passengers on the bus gave them a wide berth, sensing the lethal aura that still clung to him like the scent of expensive cologne, even in his ruin. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up in a neighborhood the Pinnacle's residents probably didn't know existed. The hallway smelled of stale curry and damp plaster. The single light bulb flickered overhead. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. He stood behind her, his presence filling the narrow space, his silence a crushing weight. She finally got the door open and stepped inside, flicking on the light. The room was small, but it was clean. A tiny kitchenette was tucked into one wall, a worn-out sofa against another. A single door led to her even smaller bedroom. Her life was contained in this little box, a life of careful budgets and quiet solitude. He stepped inside, placing his boxes carefully on the floor. He was too big for the room. His shoulders, even slumped in defeat, seemed to brush both walls. He looked around, his gaze taking in every detail, the second-hand books piled on a crate, the single, thriving succulent on the windowsill, the faded photograph of her and her grandmother on the wall. His expression was unreadable. She closed the door behind him, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden quiet. The snowstorm raged outside, but in here, for now, they were sealed in together. He was a fallen king, and she was a maid who had just offered sanctuary to a predator. She told herself it was just for one night, just until he could figure something out. She was lying to herself. She knew, with a terrifying certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was not the end of something for him. It was the beginning of something for her, and she had no idea if she would survive it. The first 24 hours were a lesson in tension. Kwon Ji-hoon moved through her tiny apartment with the predatory grace of a caged panther. He said almost nothing. He sat on her worn-out sofa, which looked comically small beneath his frame, and stared at the wall. He was a black hole of silence and stillness, sucking all the air and noise out of the room. Imani found herself moving around him, her own movements quiet and careful, as if trying not to startle a dangerous animal. She offered him the sofa to sleep on, giving him the spare blanket and a pillow. When she woke in the morning, she found he had not slept. He was sitting in the exact same position, his eyes open, staring into the pre-dawn gloom. The only difference was that he had taken off his suit jacket, folding it with meticulous care over the back of the chair. He was in his white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing taut, corded muscle and the edge of intricate black ink coiling around his right wrist. A dragon's tail. "There's coffee," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet. He just nodded, his eyes tracking her as she moved through the kitchenette. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, analytical and unnerving. She poured him a mug, black, and set it on the small coffee table. He looked at it, then at her. "Thank you, Imani," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. He must have read it on her uniform name tag at some point. Hearing it in his deep, quiet voice sent a strange shiver down her spine. It sounded different, possessive. Danger didn't wait long to find them. On the third day, a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street from her building. It didn't belong in this neighborhood of beat-up sedans and delivery trucks. It sat there for hours, a silent, menacing presence. Imani noticed it from her window. When she mentioned it, a flicker of something cold and familiar crossed Ji-hoon's face. "They found me," he said, not with fear, but with a weary sort of resignation. He went to her window, peering through a crack in the blinds. "My brother's men. They are not patient. What are you going to do?" she asked, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. "There is nothing I can do," he said, turning from the window. And that was when she saw it again, the same raw vulnerability she'd seen on the steps of his old life. The utter hopelessness. He had no money, no men, no power. He was a king with no kingdom, a target waiting for the arrow. That night, he had a nightmare. She was woken by a strangled cry from the living room. She crept to the doorway and saw him thrashing on the sofa, his body tangled in the thin blanket. He was muttering in Korean, his voice thick with anguish. One name cut through the garbled words, clear and sharp. "Sohee." He jolted awake, sitting bolt upright, his chest heaving. His eyes, wide and haunted, scanned the dark room before they landed on her. For a moment, he looked like a lost boy. Then the walls slammed back up, his expression hardening into the familiar mask of stone. "A bad dream," he said, his voice rough. She didn't press. She just went to the kitchen and got him a glass of water. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. His skin was cold, but a jolt of heat, sharp and unexpected, shot up her arm. Their eyes met over the rim of the glass. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, she saw the deep exhaustion carved into his face, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow.
She saw the man, not the myth.
"Who is Sohee?" she asked softly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. He looked away, staring at the photograph of her and her grandmother. "My sister," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "When my brother made his move, he took her as leverage to ensure my cooperation." He finally looked back at her, and his eyes were filled with a self-loathing so profound it made her ache. "I walked away from everything to keep her safe. It seems that was not enough. They still hunt me." That was his wound. The woman he had failed to protect. He had given up his empire not in a fight, but in a surrender, to save his sister. And his reward was to be hunted down and erased. The next day, two men got out of the black sedan. They were dressed in sharp suits that looked just as out of place as their car. They started going door to door, showing a picture on a phone. Imani watched them from the window, her heart pounding. They were getting closer. "You have to go," she said to Ji-hoon, her voice urgent. "They'll find you here. They'll hurt you." He looked at her, then at the door, a grim certainty on his face. "They will not stop until I am dead. Running is only a delay." "Then I'll tell them I haven't seen you," she said, the decision solidifying inside her even as she said it. "I'll lie." He stared at her, a strange, complicated emotion swirling in his dark eyes. "Why?" he asked, the single word loaded with a lifetime of suspicion. "Why would you do this for me? You owe me nothing." She thought about it. She could throw him out right now. Let his brother's men find him. Her life would go back to normal. Quiet, safe, predictable. But she looked at him, at the man who had given up everything for his sister, and she couldn't do it. She couldn't be the one to hand him over to his executioners. Because nobody deserves to be alone when the wolves are at the door, she said. It was the truest thing she had ever said. A knock, hard and insistent, echoed from her front door. They both froze. The men were here. Ji-hoon moved with a sudden, lethal speed that shocked her. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her toward the tiny bedroom. "Get in. Do not make a sound," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. The proximity was dizzying, his scent, a faint, lingering trace of cedarwood, and something uniquely him, filling her senses. He pushed her gently into the bedroom and closed the door almost completely, leaving only a hairline crack. He then moved to stand beside the front door, flattening himself against the wall, out of sight. He picked up the heaviest book from her crate, a thick hardcover history textbook, and held it like a weapon. He was a warrior again, even if his only weapon was secondhand knowledge. The knock came again, louder this time. Imani held her breath, her eye pressed to the crack in the door. She watched as one of the men, impatient, tried the doorknob. She'd forgotten to lock it. The door swung open. A large man with a flattened nose stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small apartment. "Anybody home?" he called out, his voice a low growl. He took 2 steps in, his back to Ji-hoon. And in that instant, Ji-hoon moved. It wasn't a brawl. It was a piece of brutal, silent choreography. He brought the heavy book down on the back of the man's head with a sickening thud. The man grunted, stumbling forward. Ji-hoon didn't stop. He dropped the book and flowed around the man, one arm snaking around his throat, the other hand coming up to cup his jaw. There was a sharp, horrifying crack, and the man went limp, slumping to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The second man, hearing the noise from the hallway, rushed in. He saw his partner on the floor, and his eyes widened. He reached inside his jacket, but he never had a chance. Ji-hoon was already on him, a blur of controlled violence. A precise strike to the throat, a jab to the solar plexus, a crippling blow to the knee. The second man crumpled, gasping for air, his hand frozen halfway to his gun. Ji-hoon disarmed him with practiced ease, pulling a sleek, black pistol from the man's shoulder holster. He checked the magazine, the safety, his movements economical and certain. He moved through violence like it was a language he was born speaking. He stood over the 2 down men, his chest rising and falling, the gun held loosely at his side. He was no longer the broken man from the marble steps. He was Kwon Ji-hoon, the predator, the king. And he was standing in her living room. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes finding hers through the crack in the door. The raw violence of the last 30 seconds still clung to him, a dangerous, electric charge. But when he looked at her, it softened, just for a fraction of a second. "We have to go," he said, his voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly in control. Now, her apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. They left the 2 men groaning on her floor, taking only the gun and the cash from their wallets. Ji-hoon moved with purpose, pulling Imani along by the hand, his grip a firm anchor in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. Her old life was gone. She had crossed a line. She had watched a man break another man's neck in her living room, and she was now running with him. They slipped out the back of the building and into a snowy alleyway. The world seemed muffled and unreal, the falling snow blanketing the city in a deceptive peace. Ji-hoon didn't look back. "Where are we going?" she asked, her breath pluming in the frigid air. He glanced down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Somewhere they won't find us." They ended up in a rundown motel on the industrial outskirts of the city, a place that smelled of bleach and desperation. Ji-hoon paid in cash for a room with a buzzing neon sign outside the window that cast flickering red light across the peeling wallpaper. The room was cold, the single thin blanket on the bed offering little comfort. Adrenaline had carried Imani this far, but now, in the grim quiet of the motel room, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She sank onto the edge of the lumpy mattress, wrapping her arms around herself. She had harbored a fugitive. She was an accomplice. Her quiet, orderly life was in ruins. Ji-hoon was at the window, peering through the grimy blinds at the parking lot. The gun he'd taken was now tucked into the waistband of his pants, a hard, cold reality against his spine. He had killed for her, or at least he had been willing to. He had protected her space, her home, before it was compromised. He turned from the window and looked at her. The silence in the room was a living entity, filled with the ghosts of the men on her apartment floor and the future they had just stolen. "You should have let them take me," he said, his voice flat. "Your life would not be this." "You think I could have?" she shot back, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "I could have just watched them drag you out? After what you told me about your sister?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. He crossed the small room and knelt in front of her, so his eyes were level with hers. The movement was so unexpected it stole her breath. Up close, she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way the flickering red light caught the single scar on his brow. "In my world," he said, his voice low and raw, "kindness is a weapon, a transaction. People show it only when they want something. For days, I have been trying to understand what you want from me." Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "I didn't want anything," she whispered. "I just saw someone who needed help." "No one is that simple, Imani," he countered, his voice soft but firm. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was electric, a searing brand against her cold skin. "You stayed. You lied for me.
You are here with me now. Why?"
The truth was a dangerous, sharp-edged thing lodged in her throat. She had been telling herself it was pity, that it was the right thing to do. But that wasn't the whole story. She had seen the man behind the monster, and she had felt a pull, a connection she couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. "I told myself I stayed because it was the right thing to do," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I was lying to myself. I stayed because I couldn't stand the thought of you facing them alone." His expression shifted, the hard lines of his face softening into something vulnerable and real. He held her gaze, and in the depths of his dark eyes, she saw a flicker of disbelief, of wonder, of something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "You," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name, "are the first person in a decade who has shown me loyalty without demanding a price." He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to kiss her. But he didn't. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. She could feel his breath, warm and steady against her lips. It was more intimate than a kiss, a raw, unguarded admission of trust, of need. The world outside, with its assassins and betrayals, melted away, leaving only the two of them in the flickering red light. The fragile peace of the motel room was shattered the next morning. Ji-hoon was watching the local news on the small, staticky television when a picture of her face filled the screen. It was her employee ID photo from the Pinnacle, stark and unflattering. "Police are asking for help locating Imani Williams," the news anchor said in a somber tone. "A person of interest in a violent assault that took place in her apartment last night. She is believed to be in the company of this man, Kwon Ji-hoon, who is considered armed and dangerous." Imani felt the blood drain from her face. They hadn't just made her a fugitive. They had made her the target. His brother wasn't just hunting him anymore. He was using her as bait. "My brother is clever," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned off the television, plunging the room into silence. "He knows I will not let them harm you. He will use you to draw me out." The stakes were no longer just his life. They were hers. His war had come for her, personally. She looked at him, at the cold fury hardening his features, and she knew he was already planning, calculating. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said, his mind already 3 steps ahead. "Away from me." "No," she said, the word coming out with a strength that surprised her. "There is no away from you anymore. They've put my face on television. Wherever I go, they'll look for me. The only safe place is with you, ending this." He stared at her, a conflict raging in his eyes. The instinct to protect her ward with the tactical reality of her words. She was right. They were chained together now, for better or for worse. Her survival was now inextricably linked to his. "This ends one way," he said grimly. "I face my brother. One of us walks away. Then you're going to need help, she said, her mind racing. She was no gangster, no killer. But she wasn't helpless. She had worked at the Pinnacle for 2 years. She knew things.
She had seen things.
The men who come to see you, they don't all use the front door. There's a man, Mr. Choi. An old man. He tends the rooftop garden. He always brought you tea. The others treated him like a servant, but you always bowed to him. You treated him with respect. Ji-hoon's head snapped up, his eyes locking on hers. Choi, you know of him. I know he used a service elevator with a special key, she continued, the pieces clicking into place. And I know that after your brother took over, Mr. Choi was fired. I saw him leaving. He looked devastated. He was loyal to you, Ji-hoon. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Ji-hoon's face. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it was a terrifying sight. It was the smile of a king who had just found a hidden army. You are not just loyal, Imani, he said, his voice laced with a newfound admiration. You are intelligent. Finding Mr. Choi was their only chance. He was the old guard, a man whose loyalty was to Ji-hoon's father and then to Ji-hoon himself. He was a relic from a time of honor that Ji-hoon's ambitious younger brother, Min-jun, had discarded. They used the last of their cash for a burner phone, and Ji-hoon made a single call. The meeting was set for a closed restaurant in the heart of Koreatown. As they approached, Imani felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. This was it, the point of no return. Ji-hoon put a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of reassurance that was both comforting and possessive. Inside, the restaurant was dark, smelling of stale beer and soy sauce. Mr. Choi sat alone at a table in the back, a small, elderly man with eyes that had seen too much. When he saw Ji-hoon, he stood and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. Young master, he said, his voice raspy. I knew you would not be defeated so easily. The three of them talked for hours. Choi confirmed that Min-jun's hold on the organization was tenuous. He had seized power through treachery, not strength, and many of the older captains were uneasy. He ruled through fear, not loyalty. And most importantly, Choi knew Min-jun's weakness. He had a secret ledger, one that detailed his illegal dealings with a rival Chinese triad, a deal that would be seen as a deep betrayal by the syndicate's elders. The ledger was kept in a safe in the penthouse, Ji-hoon's old penthouse. Getting it is impossible, Choi said. The place is a fortress now. Not impossible, Imani said quietly. They both looked at her. I have the master keycard for cleaning services. I was supposed to turn it in on my last day, but with everything that happened, I forgot. She pulled the simple plastic card from her wallet. It won't get me past the guards in the lobby, but if we can get to the service levels, it will get me into the service elevator. And into the penthouse. Ji-hoon stared at the keycard, then at her. The plan forming between them was insane, suicidal. But it was the only one they had. The final confrontation was a blur of calculated risks and heart-stopping terror. Choi used his old connections to disable the security cameras in the service corridors for exactly 10 minutes. Ji-hoon dealt with the 2 guards in the parking garage with a brutal efficiency that left Imani breathless. Then it was her turn. Dressed in her old uniform, she walked through the service corridors of the Pinnacle, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She reached the service elevator, swiped the card, and held her breath. A green light blinked. The doors slid open. Inside the penthouse, the silence was eerie. The place was exactly as she remembered cleaning it, yet it felt alien, hostile. She knew where the office was. Ji-hoon had described the safe, hidden behind a large abstract painting. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the combination he had given her. It felt like an eternity before she heard the soft click of the tumblers falling into place. She pulled the heavy steel door open. The ledger was there, just as he'd said. She grabbed it, her fingers closing around the worn leather cover. That's when she heard the sound, the soft chime of the private elevator arriving at the penthouse floor. Her blood ran cold. Min-jun was here. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The office door swung open. Kwon Min-jun stood there, flanked by 2 guards. He was younger than Ji-hoon, his face smoother, but his eyes held a snake's coldness. He looked at her, then at the open safe, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "The maid," he said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "My brother always did have a soft spot for the help. Did you really think it would be this easy?" He had been waiting for them. It was a trap. Before his men could move, the floor-to-ceiling window behind Minjun exploded inward in a shower of glass. Ji-hoon swung into the room from a rope, a wraith descending from the night sky. He had used the window-washing rig on the roof. He landed in a crouch, the gun from the motel steady in his hand. The next few seconds were chaos. Gunshots echoed in the enclosed space, deafeningly loud. Imani screamed and dove behind the heavy desk as the room erupted in violence. She saw Ji-hoon move, not like a man, but like a force of nature. He was a blur of motion, precise and lethal, taking out Minjun's guards before they could even get a clear shot. Then it was just the two brothers, circling each other in the wreckage of the magnificent room. "You should have stayed gone, brother," Minjun snarled, pulling his own weapon. "You should have never touched my sister," Ji-hoon replied, his voice deadly calm. "And you should have never, ever, touched what is mine." His eyes flickered to Imani for a fraction of a second, and in that look, she understood. He wasn't talking about the penthouse or the organization. He was talking about her. The final gunshot was singular, decisive. Minjun crumpled to the floor, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with shocked disbelief. Ji-hoon stood over him, his face a mask of cold granite, the smoking gun still in his hand. The cost had been paid. Blood for blood. In the aftermath, with Mr. Choi and the loyal captains securing the building, the penthouse was quiet again. The sirens wailed in the distance, a sound from another world. Ji-hoon walked over to the desk where Imani was still huddled. He knelt before her, gently taking the ledger from her trembling hands. He set it aside, his priorities clear. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheek. His hands were shaking just slightly, the only sign of the battle he had just fought. "It's over," he said, his voice soft. She looked at him, the man who had been a broken king on a snowy steppe, the man who had become her protector, her partner in chaos. He was the boss again, the most powerful man in the city's underworld. His empire was his once more. He saw the question in her eyes, the uncertainty.
What now?
Where did she, a maid from a fourth floor walk-up, fit into this world of blood and power? He didn't offer promises of love or a normal life. He offered her the only truth he knew. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and led her to the shattered window. The city spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of a million lights, a million lives that were not theirs. The cold night air washed over them, carrying the scent of snow and rain. He stood behind her, his presence a solid, unshakable wall. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His empire was at their feet. "They tried to take everything from me," he said, his voice a low rumble next to her ear. "My name, my life, my family. They failed." He paused, and she felt his gaze on her, more intense than the city lights below. "They made one mistake. They thought you were my weakness. They did not understand." His hand finally came to rest on her waist, a firm, possessive claim. It was not a question.
It was a statement.
"You are not my weakness, Imani," he said, his voice absolute. "You are my territory, and I protect what is mine." She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She looked out at the vast, sprawling city, a world she had only ever served, never owned. She thought of her small, empty apartment, her quiet, lonely life. It was safe. It was simple. And it was no longer hers. She had crossed a line and stepped into his world of shadows. And as she leaned back, ever so slightly, into the solid warmth of the man behind her, she knew she had made her choice. She was not leaving. She was home.